Hello all. In this video, we'll be talking about the introduction of big data, what is big data, and basic concepts related to big data. So, coming to understanding what is big data, before understanding it, we need to understand what is data. So, what do you mean by data? So, data is simply anything which contain some details. It can be of anything containing details can be called as a data. So then how it is different from information? Let's say we can illustrate with it with this example. Let's say I have written like this: I, Krish, Yam. So this there are some details in it. This is called as a data, not information. But let's say I have this thing, this kind of data. So this is also data, but this can be called as information. Why? Because here there is, along with data, there is some meaning to it. Hence, it can be called as some information. So here, I am Krish is an information, and Krish Yam is a data. Now then, what is big data? So these are the datas which are generally small in nature, or which are not big enough to be called as a big data. So then what is the criteria to be called any data as a big data? So there is 5 V's criteria, which we'll be talking in a little while. Before it, let's understand the theoretical definition of big data. So it is nothing but the collection of large data set that keeps on growing exponentially. So the data, there is no fixed limit to it. So if it keeps on growing exponentially, then it can be called as a big data. So this big data cannot be handled by the traditional data management tools. So let's say what's the example of big data is something like we can say live streaming of cricket. Also the Facebook data, Instagram data, Twitter data. So for that case, any social media, and also let's say banking. So all these datas are huge in nature, so they can be called as a big data. Now, there are majorly three types of data. They are structured data, semi-structured data, and unstructured data. What do you mean by semi-structured data? So anything which is having a predefined schema, which is of this nature, tables kind of data. Example, it will be having rows and columns. Then it can be called as structured data. Then what is semi-structured data? So if the format is of in JSON or XML or etc. of these kind, then it can be called as semi-structured data. So we know how the JSON file structure will be. It will be of this kind. So everything is an object here. This is one object. This is one object. So which will be defined in these flower brackets. And what is unstructured data? So there is no form through which it can be this data can be represented. Example is audio, video, image. These are all example of unstructured data. So we have seen what is the definition of big data and example of it. What are the different types of data that are available practical in real world. Now let's see the 5 E's criteria. So here we can also say the big data in this way. Any data related problem which satisfies the 5 V criteria can also be called as a big data. So anything which satisfies these 5 V criteria can definitely call as big data. Let's see what is this 5 V's. One is volume. What do you mean by volume? So it is nothing but huge amount of data. So there should be a huge amount of data. That is condition one. Then second condition is variety of data. So the data is not fixed. So with respect to big data, we can't say the data is only structured or data will be only semi-structured. No, it is not of that type. We can have semi-structured data, structured data, or unstructured data. Any type of data is possible. What are the different types of data? We have already seen it now. Next, what is velocity? So it means the speed of data generation is so quick. So there are majorly two types of data generation. One is through batch data, one is through real-time data. Real-time data, we can say it as like a cricket live stream, we can say. And example of batch data is like so the data will be processed in batches. Batches means there will be a certain time period. Example is electricity bill. So electricity bill, it will be generated for every 30 days. So it will be processed for every 30 days. Within the 30 days, everything will be collected and stored. And just after 30 days of collection of data, will be processing all at once. So this is called as batch data. And real-time data is anything like social media or cricket live streaming, these things. Next is value. Uh, with the big data, with all the data we have, we should be able to extract some meaningful information out of it. This is called as a value. Then what is veracity? Veracity is nothing but uncertainty of data. What do you mean by uncertainty? It is nothing but untrustworthiness of data. Like whatever the data we have received may not be in a proper fashion. Example, there may be a missing values that may be present. So there will be a veracity or uncertainty of the data. So any data which satisfies these 5 criteria can be definitely called as a big data. Now let's understand various steps involved in deploying the big data solution. So this is how the data pipeline look like and how in the practical data engineer used to design these data pipelines. First step is will be the data ingestion. So there will be different tools like Scoop, etc., which will be helpful for sake of data ingestion. So what it majorly does is to get the data from the source and use to and help and will be helpful to put the data into the data storage. So here all the data will be stored in this data storage, and after storing it, we'll be processing the data using the ETL tools like example Spark, all those things. So we'll see what are the tools that are exactly involved in all the steps. So these are all the big data tools. So first thing we'll be using the cloud, any one of three. So Amazon Web Services, Azure of Microsoft, and Google Cloud Platform. And next is databases. There are two type of databases. One is transactional databases and other is NoSQL databases. Transaction databases are something like we can say like it will be like tables format. There will be a rows and there will be columns. Whereas in NoSQL it is not. So the name itself says there is no structured query language. So the data is not so structured here. So there are various examples of NoSQL like Cassandra, DynamoDB, and HBase, MongoDB, etc. And coming to storage, we'll be using the HDFS, which is Hadoop file system. And coming to processing, for batch processing, we'll be using the Hadoop and Spark. And for real time, we can use the Spark and Fling. So we can say that Spark is useful for both batch processing as well as a real time data processing. Now coming to data analysis, we'll be having a data lakes, which is a persistent storage, and there will be for a data warehouse, we'll be having a Hive and Snowflake. So these two tools will be using for data warehousing. And coming to messaging queue, we'll be using Kafka. And for sake of scheduling, we'll be using the Airflow tool. So the data pipeline mostly will be of this kind. So initially from the source, we'll be getting the data. So there will be as we are talking in this case about the big data, so there will be a huge amount of data that will be generated at the source. So to process it uh, in a cool fashion, so we'll be using the message queue. So the message one, message two. So in this way we'll be using. So what is the system here we'll be using is Kafka. So for this we'll be using the Kafka tool. Then after processing, we'll be after using this message queue, so that we'll be able to send the message from the source to the consumer in a cool fashion, or we can say in an organized manner. So now after receiving to the consumer, we will be applying whatever the transformations actions which we want to apply, like joining the table, like joining aggregations. All this will be doing here. So simply the data processing will be happening here. So data processing will be happening here. So what do you mean by data processing? How it will be doing it? We'll be looking it in a separate video. So what the tool will be here using for data processing means Spark. And then we can use the data warehousing. So data warehousing, there are tools like Hive, Snowflake, all those things. And we can also store data in the DB using any kind of, mostly we'll be using SQL because it's a big data and most of the data will be semi-structured or unstructured. So the different type of database here we'll be using are like Cassandra or DynamoDB or HBase. So based upon the requirement. So how we'll be deciding what type of database we need to use is basically we'll be having something called as a cap theorem. So we'll be learning it in a separate video. So what does it mean means consistency, availability, and partition. So based upon this theorem, we can decide which particular database we should be using. So these are mostly about the big data tools. So and what we have completely learned in this video is what is big data, definition of big data, different types of data that are available, and which data can be called as a big data that is satisfying 5E criteria, and what are the data pipeline, how it will be looking like, and what is the big data tools that we'll be using. That's it in this video. Thank you.